You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is Christopher Andersen, critically acclaimed author of 18 New York Times bestsellers and 36 books, which have been translated into more than 25 countries worldwide. Two of his books, The Day Diana Died and The Day John Died, about JFK Jr., reached #1 on the bestseller list. A former contributing editor of Time and longtime senior editor of People, Andersen has also written hundreds of articles for a wide range of publications, including the New York Times, Life, and Vanity Fair. Mr. Andersen has appeared frequently on such programs as Today, Good Morning America, NBC Nightly News, CBS This Morning, 2020, Anderson Cooper 360, Dateline NBC, Entertainment Tonight, and many more. He is the second member of the Andersen family to join us, and he has a tough act to follow as Kate Andersen Brower came on a few years ago to discuss her works on the White House, the presidents, and the first ladies. Mr. Andersen is joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast to discuss his latest work, The King, Life of Charles III. Mr. Andersen, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Who was that person you were describing? He just sounds absolutely fascinating.
All I know is he's got a beautiful home and a full head of hair. So congratulations, Mr. Andersen.
Your home looks like a movie set.
It's because it looks like
Rod Serling to walk through there.
Well, you know, it's the Seinfeld apartment, and it's the only way I can get through Zoom calls without falling backwards.
I gotcha.
I get a lot of comments on it, and sometimes it completely derails a lot of business meetings. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
You're, as I said just before we started recording, you're a longtime journalist, so we're not going to bury the lead here.
Yes.
The news that is enveloping the royal family, the book by Prince Harry called Spare, and their Netflix series. Given your extensive research and knowledge of the Windsors, the current British royal family, take a few minutes, please, and just give us your thoughts on Harry and Meghan and William and Kate, which is kind of the 21st century version of Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice.
I don't know about that, but go ahead.
And how it's
all crawling into bed together. It's not going to
happen. And how it is affecting King Charles III.
Well, you know, there's an interesting line in the book, apparently, which technically hasn't been released yet. You know, it's only leaked through the Spanish publisher. But what apparently at one point during Philip's funeral, the two brothers got together and with Charles briefly, and they began to argue, as might have been expected. And Charles said, "Please don't make my final years miserable." And I think that's what's happening. I mean, here's a guy who's waited his entire life, 70 years, to a plus, to take on this role, to take on this job, and at a critical time when he really needs to get the British people behind him, to kind of create that bond of affection and loyalty with his subjects that his mother had, and he does not have yet. He does not need his sons to be feuding, and very, very publicly. So it's a critical time for the monarchy. It's a critical time for the royal family. As far as I'm concerned, you were asking about the what Meghan and Harry are doing. I mean, I think even their staunchest allies now are beginning to wonder what all the whining is about. I mean, they've gotten their degree of independence. They've made these fantastically lucrative deals with Netflix and publishers. So what else can be said? I mean, William and Charles have remained silent. I don't think it's going to last. I think the king is going to definitely take some retaliatory move. This book is explosive. You can see it's going to, it's already, I mean, it's wonderful for people who are interested in the royal family, because Harry is pulling no punches here. He's talking about incident after incident. One of them where his brother, as you know, allegedly attacks him and kind of hurls him to the floor and this sort of thing over Meghan. I think it's going to be the final nail in the coffin, and I think the king has one thing he can do, and that is take away their royal status, which they still have the HRH designation. Right. Not supposed to use it, but unlike the case with Diana, when Diana was stripped of her royal status, the HRH, her Royal Highness status, Meghan and Harry still have it. So that could be taken away from them. Their titles could be taken away from them. I don't think there's any hope of Archie and Lily, the Sussexes' children, ever becoming
right.
prince. They might have been, but that's not going to happen now. So yeah, a lot of things are in motion here, and Charles is the center of the act.
And King Charles III has said multiple times that he wants a stripped down British monarchy reflective of the 21st century.
Right, but he also wants all the pomp and ceremony and magnificence. I mean, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I mean, that could be the motto of the the British royal family. Well, and the Romanovs too, but that's a whole other story. It's the mystique. I have a chapter in the book that refers to something that was said by a well-known British historian. You must not. What was the phrase? You must not let daylight in upon magic, because once the people know that the jig is up. So I think he wants to maintain that pomp and ceremony and grandeur, and he's also somebody who's lived the royal life. And I write, of course, about his heartbreaking childhood, which I think makes Charles the man he is today. And it is a very bleak and sad and heartbreaking childhood, isolated childhood, and somebody who's used to getting his way, who knew he would be king, and therefore developed this kind of odd combination of victimhood and insecurity, combined with a grand sense of entitlement. Now, in fairness, if a king can't, if anybody can have a sense of entitlement, it will be the King of England. I've seen that coming.
Harry and Meghan seem to a lot of the coverage here, and you live here in the United States, but across the pond and here in the colonies, it seems like they just want to eat chocolate all day and never gain weight.
Right.
They want to use the what'd you say?
That's a great line. I like that. Yeah, that seems to be what's going on. I will say that in Britain, their popularity has just plummeted.
Right.
But unlike, they still have their defenders here, many of them. I think, don't you think that the documentary really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, even people who were there?
More so than, you've read a ton of British history. I've read a ton of British history. They've accepted some sort of stratification of society, whether it's because of the royal family or the titles that date back centuries. The United States and Americans, we don't play that game. And when you're whining about your life in a 10,000 square foot mansion and you could ward tiaras and, you're making all this money and everything's so terrible. My sense is the American people just look at you and go, well, let me tell you about terrible lives. Why don't you come here and take a look? What do you think?
Well, I have Katharine Hepburn's photograph. I was a friend of hers, actually, but interviewed her many times, wrote books about her right over my shoulder here. And the Queen tried to meet Kate Hepburn many times. And Kate kept, and then she refused to do it. She said, because I'm an American. We got rid of kings and queens a long time ago. I mean, you got to kind of really respect that kind of moxie. But I did say to her, oh, come on, let's make exceptions here. It's not George III we're talking about. But you're right. But on the other hand, there's a fascination. It's a fairy tale gone wrong. We're fascinated by them because there's always been this bond between Americans and let's face it, the mother country, and in a sense, culturally anyway. Speak the same language makes a big difference.
We can look at the monarchy without having to bow to it, and that's a huge difference.
Yes, and I think what makes it more interesting here is that we have the Queen. Look, we knew who the Queen was. The difference between the Charles and Queen Elizabeth is that, as I write in the opening line of the book, she was this colossus astride,
Why man, he doth bestride our narrow world like a colossus.
There you are, but clutching her handbag. And and she was always there. I mean, one statistic which I love says that 95% of the Earth's population only knows a world with the Queen in it, only knew a world with the Queen in it. So we all felt we knew her. She certainly, that's because she knew herself. Unlike Charles, who I think is still very much a work in progress. He's paradoxical, enigmatic, and it all began again in the beginning because as a child, Winston Churchill looks at this 3-year-old kid, very withdrawn, very thoughtful, and says, for a child, he thinks too much. And I think that's very true. I think he's surprisingly introspective and intellectual on a certain level. And because of that, he's been just riddled with self-doubt. And he had no parental support. I mean, unlike the Queen, who really had, because she had originally, until she was 10, was not going to be the monarch. She had a very, I don't want to say a normal childhood, certainly, but she had the support and love of her mother and father. This is something that Charles never had. I mean, he saw them 15 minutes in the morning, and 15 minutes, the nannies took him in to meet.
And that was typical, right? That's typical of children of the sovereign. I mean, there's even allusion to it in the movie The King's Speech, that you get presented and then they go on to do other things. So in terms of royalty raising their children, or the direct line of the throne, that's common. What I found surprising in what you wrote was that Charles didn't experience that from his own mother. And you'd have to figure that Queen Elizabeth would look upon her time as a kid as, one of the best times of her life. So why wouldn't she want to replicate it?
Right. Well, something, as her first secretary said, private secretary, that something was sealed off emotionally in her. She was a very unemotional woman. I think it was because this huge job was dumped on her at the age of 25. And she focused on that, and that was it. And of course, Philip had a horrendous childhood.
Oh, absolutely terrible. Speaking of the Romanovs.
Yes, exactly. Yes. That's a whole other story, isn't it? Yeah, all that DNA, But what I think is interesting is that, he did form a bond with his grandmother, which he talked about, and of course with Mabel Andersen, Charles's nanny, who is still alive. And
wow.
And he's still close to. And she was the only one allowed to repair his teddy bear, which he still has. We will not discuss that in any great detail, other than to say he's always been dependent on
I promise.
These little totems and things. Peculiar guy, eccentricities, but that's the British way. But he was isolated from the beginning. I've always said that the most touching moment, I thought, incident, it just speaks volumes, is the time when he's 4 years old. His mother goes on her first tour of the Commonwealth. She comes back 6 months later. He rushes up to meet her, and she just kind of brushes him aside. No, not you, and greets the adults. And then by the time it's his turn, she literally, reaches down and shakes his hand as if he were a 42-year-old man. I mean, that's on video, that's on film. We have that. incident, I think that was the nature of their relationship. He didn't have one with either parent. And when they sent him away to these horrendous boarding schools, Cheam, and then which is a school in near London, and then there's Gordonston in Scotland, which I write about in detail. He was literally tortured, by the other. I mean, we would look at this now as physical and emotional abuse on the part of other older students and even teachers at that school, and yet his pleas to please be brought home, tear-stained letters, were just ignored. They just wanted to toughen him up. And as a result, he's a very emotionally damaged person on a certain level, I think.
And there was no or little difference between how he was treated publicly and how he was treated privately.
Right. Well, no, publicly, in the sense that he was the heir.
In the sense that, you mentioned, and this has been in a lot of the reviews of your book, which, by the way, are all positive, terrific reviews of your book, that incident is mentioned. And I could see how the queen could act that way publicly, like, let me do my queen stuff and then I'll be your mother. But I mean, a lot of us act differently with our children in public when they're younger, as opposed to, in the privacy of our own home. And you're saying is it was the same freezer everywhere.
Right. And I don't think she was capable of really any kind of an emotional relationship with him. But of course, the really hurtful thing is, the Anne, who was treated the same way by her mother, actually had a wonderful relationship with Philip, who saw her as a kindred spirit, as kind of a kind of a rough and tumble kid, and they bonded. So then when Andrew comes along and Edward, these are the much younger children, and then at that point the queen suddenly decides, well, I'm going to have something approaching a normal relationship with my children. So Charles is the odd man out from the very beginning, and all of his siblings have somebody to love, as it were, in the family. He never did. And it's again, I think he conflates that with the love of the British people. I think he's now saying, well, one of his lines that's been repeated over the years is, why do they love her and not me? That started with Diana, really, because, of course, she was adored and he was very jealous of that. And that was one of the factors in the deterioration of their relationship. But not the main factor. Camilla was the main factor. But
it was a crowded marriage.
A crowded marriage. There were 3 of them in that marriage.
To quote the princess.
Well, I've got to say, I'm on Team Diana and always have been. People continually, and I'll take a detour here, but they're always trying to, draw parallels between the situation that Meghan found herself in, or even Kate found herself in. The difference there is that Diana was alone up against the monarchy and the
firm.
Yes, the firm. And she didn't have anybody at her side. I mean, William has Kate, and they have each other, and Harry has Meghan. I mean, it's not a similar situation. There would have been no problem had Camilla not been in the picture. I don't think.
I don't know if you're familiar with British historian Sarah Gristwood. She writes a lot on the Tudor period. She wrote a biography of Churchill. I interviewed her just a few days ago and said on this very topic that you mentioned, and it's perfect segue. I said, true or false, Kate Middleton is the royal family's secret weapon. And she goes, oh, you bet it is. Or you bet she is. Absolutely. Yeah. What do you think?
Oh, totally. I'm totally, again, I think she's, I don't think she's underestimated either. I think she's a powerhouse, and her staying power was Wadey Katie, remember, for 10 years she was there, being dangled in front of the British people. But she was, she's the first true commoner, or will be, to be queen. People forget that she's descended from coal miners. That for a time her mother lived in public housing. That her mother was an airline, a flight attendant. I mean, who built her own really remarkable business from scratch. So yes, she went to private schools. Kate Middleton did. She hobnobbed with the aristocracy, indeed, but she wasn't born into it, And so I think that's a remarkable leap, much more so than someone like, well, obviously Meghan marrying into the family is something, but
Diana was part of the aristocracy.
And there's no question. As a matter of fact, she referred to the family as the Germans, because she was far more English than they were, right? Oh yeah, no. And she used to call, I love this one. She used to call, well, she called famously Camilla the Rottweiler, you know, and Camilla called her Barbie. That was her nickname for Diana. But Diana used to call Charles the Boy Wonder, which I always thought was great.
Well, a few minutes ago, you talked about the magic, never let, and I think Prince Philip, you correct me if I'm getting the person wrong, but I think it was Prince Philip who, when they were complaining or someone was talking about all the appearances and all the requests and do this, you got to do this, and please come to this, and please come to that. And someone was saying, how do you handle all the requests? Was it Prince Philip or someone else that said, the only time we need to worry is when they stop asking?
Ah, that sounds like something he'd say. Well, he's one, again, I know people have developed a sort of a warm spot for him, but I don't know. He was very abusive to Charles, humiliated him in public, he reduced him to tears even as a young man, and Charles could never please him. And there was that was a really toxic relationship. If the Queen was remote and cold and aloof and all those things that Charles said she was, Philip was down a bully, classic bully. So, but yes, indeed, you're right. They need to have the public interested, and we are. They keep doing enough to keep us watching.
You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest is author Christopher Andersen. He's discussing his latest book, The King, The Life of Charles III. You mentioned Charles's close relationship with Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Right. We just, a few weeks ago, interviewed Gareth Russell, who wrote the book, The Fizzy Life of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. I forget the exact title, wet gin or something to dry wit, but it's The Fizzy Life. Yeah. If you haven't read the book, Mr. Andersen, you should. It is hysterical.
It sounds like it's all about drinking.
But it is.
It is. The whole group, especially, and the Queen too,
Oh, that's right. It's a wonderful book. But in that book is detailed for a little bit the relationship between Prince Charles and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. You mentioned it a few minutes ago. Give us a little more detail on how he went to her.
Well, he, as a young child, she saw in him a sensitive boy and a thinker. And Philip saw weakness. He thought, which at the time would have been a big concern for somebody like Philip, that perhaps Charles was gay, which would not have gone over well with the hypermasculine Philip, and he was became very dependent on the Queen Mother, whom he of course described later on at her death as the most magical kind of grandmother you could ever hope to have. She defended him, but don't forget, with the grandmother, the Queen Mother, who invented that title for herself. People think that's right. Although she'd made that all up. She hated Philip, and he hated her. So much so that she wanted to live at Windsor, and he actually had the heat turned off to drive her out of the house early in his marriage with the Queen.
Do you think the Queen Mother hated Prince Philip more than she hated the Duchess of Windsor?
Oh God, no. He was no. Wallace Simpson was in a completely different sphere. The whole royal family detested her. Thought she, basically, the Queen Mother blamed Wallace Simpson for killing, George the Sixth, putting this great burden on this guy who was thought to be very fragile, and physically he was. I mean, he died.
He was,
yeah. But the Queen, the thing about Charles that I find fascinating is, and one of the quirky things, is how many times he's cheated death over the years.
A plane crash or helicopter crash, excuse me, and
he had
assassination attempt.
Right. He had also when he was doing a RAF training, he got his feet tangled in the lines of his parachute, and he was upside down and just righted himself just in the nick of time. He just recently revealed that when he was at Trinity College at Cambridge, he was on his bike and was hit by a bus, and he just got up and he thought, I'm alive. How is this possible? Had he died in either of those incidents, we would be looking at King Andrew, which I think would be a interesting,
Well, you mentioned earlier about Queen Elizabeth loving her two younger kids. I mean, clearly she spoiled the living heck out of Prince Andrew, and look how he turned out. And the relationship between Charles and Andrew appears to be bitter and cold.
Well, it has been, Oddly enough, though, Charles allowed Andrew to go on the Christmas walk at church this year, which I thought was peculiar. He also let him wear his uniform to the Queen's funeral. In the first appearances, Harry was not allowed to wear his uniform. Later on, they changed that, allowed him to. But so I don't know if this is it's weird. Is there a softening going on? I know between Charles and his attitude toward Andrew. Maybe he thinks he needs to keep as many family members, on the team as he can, given the situation with Harry. I mean, always being there. That's the other thing. I mean, there's no question that he and Diana, of course, thought Harry and his wife would be standing on that balcony, for years, alongside King Charles. But that doesn't look like it's happening.
When you read a biography or even just articles about Charles, he grew up and came of age in such a turbulent time. Obviously, here in the United States, we're talking the 60s, early 70s, but in other places worldwide, you had the troubles going on between Ireland and Great Britain around that time. How did growing up, a baby boomer, for lack of a better term, affect and shape Charles?
Well, I'm his age, so I think it's remarkable. I don't think of him as a contemporary, and I don't think he thinks himself that way. He just doesn't seem like a child of the 60s.
He doesn't seem like he's listening to Led Zeppelin or, the Beatles backward songs.
No, right. Well, I went to Berkeley in the 60s, so that'll give you an idea of, that was the center of the whole thing, the counterculture. But and I was a reporter then too, so it was a lot of fun. But Charles, he had this huge crush on Barbara Streisand, which I write about in the book. And their relationship became very friendly, so to speak. And so I think that was the level that he was at. He was kind of almost it was almost as if he was more of someone who grew up in the 40s, 50s, that kind of thing. But he still has a desire to move ahead and to modernize the monarchy. He's one of these people that I think, again, the paradoxes. He is still an enigma. I mean, we don't think of him as somebody who would have gone through Jungian, therapies and that sort of thing. He talks to his plants. We know about that. That's one of his. He has a spiritual side. He's just more complex than I think most people realize.
It's almost a person of the earth.
Yes, one of those. But he's quite. Again, I think he's got his hands full with the current situation, and we'll see if if the monarchy succeeds and thrives, it'll be because of him, and if it goes down in flames, it'll be because of him.
But growing up in the late 60s and that sort of era, I mean, you covered it obviously and grew up, as you just said. I wasn't born until 67, so I'm a Gen Xer like your daughter. So we're the happiest people on earth because we had Prince and MTV. But did he ever have a phase or a mood or, I can't think of the term to use, where he questioned authority and he's like, hey, look, it's not as like it used to be in the Victorian age, which, or Edwardian age, in which his mother and father grew up? Did he have a rebellious period?
Well, does he? Does he want that? I mean, he wants to maintain the status quo to a certain extent because he's going to be sitting on top of the heap. I don't really think there was a time when he was, when he was at Cambridge, you would have thought that would have been the time for him to rebel, but no, he chose not to. He, as a matter of fact, saw his fellow students as scruffy and grubby, and he used all sorts of horrible things in his letters home and in his diaries to describe the contempt he had for his fellow students, who that again, those were the people protesting against the Vietnam War and that sort of thing, counterculture type. So he could hardly wait to get out of college and move on to the military, where I think there was a better fit for him. Definitely.
You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is Christopher Andersen, and we are sponsored by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored again by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Mr. Andersen, let's fast forward to something that I can remember. Actually, I remember when it happened and how it affected then Prince of Wales, Charles.
Right.
And that's the assassination of Lord Louis Mountbatten, Earl of Mountbatten in 1979 by the IRA. It was huge news around the world at the time. Mountbatten, and you may have covered it actually back then, but Prince Charles and Earl Mountbatten were very, very close.
Right. You know, I never met Mountbatten, but I did encounter him once on the street and on Fifth Avenue. Towering figure.
He's at a central casting, isn't he? I mean, like if you're going to cast someone in a movie to play somebody royal, it's him.
Exactly. He must have been he seemed as if he was 7 feet tall. Let's put it that way. But and of course, for people my age and a little older, you know, he was just this World War II iconic figure, historic figure. You know, Lord Mountbatten of Burma. All the you couldn't help but be impressed by him. When he was blown up by the IRA, of course, it was a crushing and devastating loss for Charles. I mean, Charles viewed Mountbatten as his real father. You know, he viewed him more as a grandfather figure. Mountbatten had his own plans. You know, there's no mistake. It's not an accident now that it's no longer the Windsors, but the Mountbatten Windsors. He managed to get in there because he was a great grandchild of Queen Victoria.
And the Mountbattens were the Battenbergs and changed their name.
Oh, please. They're all German. You know, I mean, it's a very Germanic group. And boy, the most German of all in many ways was, I think, Philip. I mean, wow. But indeed, it was a horrible loss for him. And of course, it was because Diana, when she met him in 79, expressed, and they were walking through a field, he was dating Diana's sister Sarah at the time. Charles was, and but he had a little time alone with this very young woman, Diana, and she said how sorry she felt for him, and she could see how the loss on his face and how he was grieving, and this touched him at the time, apparently. But I have to say, you know, I can remember. This takes me back to being covering the Silver Jubilee
in 77.
77, the Queen's marking the Queen's 25th anniversary on the throne.
May I ask you another quick question? Did you cover the Queen when she came here to celebrate the bicentennial in 76?
I did not. I mean, personally, I mean, I was in charge of people's. I'm trying to think of what, you know. Well, in essence, I was a senior editor of People magazine, and one of my jobs was covering the royals, starting in 1974. But I'd already been writing. I was the Time magazine was writing about them in the early 70s as well. But what I remember about the 25th anniversary specifically was we were in Westminster Abbey. It was the Maundy Thursday thing that they did, and for some reason I was sitting next to the royal enclosure, as it were. And the royal family came in, and it was the whole bunch. Everybody family was there, but remember, Diana wasn't in the picture yet. And so I'm looking at all these people, and it was everyone knew them. They're very famous, but in retrospect, it was a pretty drab group. I mean, they were a waxworks bunch, and I guess Charles was 27 at the time, and it wasn't until like 6 months later, seven or 8 months later, when Diane enters the picture, that suddenly you have this injection of, life and glamour and all the things that she brought to it. And so it's just a very different world, even though the Crowne, for example, shows that there was a tremendous amount of action behind the scenes that people weren't aware of. But it was Diana who really, was a breath of fresh air.
Well, let me ask you either a very complex question or a very simple question. Why did Charles marry Diana?
Well, someone said he made the mistake of marrying his trophy wife first. No, look, he was forced into it. Philip said, hey, you got to make a decision. You got to move on. She was, and she was vetted. People don't realize, and I write about this in some detail, by Camilla. Camilla got together with another one of Charles's mistresses, Lady Tryon, Kanga Tryon, and they went over a list of women who would be appropriate kind of mothers for the future heir. And Diana was always at the top of the list. So there's Diana, perfectly aware of what's going on. And again, a number of incidents where by the time she's walking down the aisle, she knows she's destined, this marriage is not going to work, because there is Camilla sitting with her son in her lap, standing on the chair next to her, and watching it all. And she's Diana, eventually recalls as she's walking down the aisle, not being able to take her eyes off Camilla in her gray suit and gray pillbox hat, just grinning from ear to ear, because she set the whole thing up. So yes, it was a mess from the get-go, that marriage, and of course it all played out in the papers and the headlines and the scandals that went on for 17 years.
Do you think Charles was ever in love with her?
No, but she was in love with him. That was the problem. Like every schoolgirl, don't forget, he was the number one bachelor for a whole generation, and she was part of that generation. So she had his picture on the wall, the same way that girls had, William's picture on their wall, the next generation. But and I think that's the tragedy of it all. She felt humiliated and ignored and all of those things, when indeed the monarchy was already beginning to founder when she entered it, and she kind of rescued it by
did.
Yeah. And of course she had that remarkable touch that Charles doesn't have. William and Kate seem to. Harry and Meghan have it as well, the ability to touch people and connect with them. But Charles has never been able to do that, and I don't think he's capable of doing it, because he's sort of emotionally stunted in a sense.
And did Diana, I mean, I hate to ask this question, but it's so obvious. I guess I can't, as someone who came of age when Diana was on every magazine cover in the world, and she's absolutely beautiful. Nothing beats that. I think was it white or shimmery dress that she wore to some event, and she exposed one shoulder, and all of us in high school were like, oh my God, she's perfect. Did she ever look at Charles and go, do you see all this? Like, why the hell do you want her? Like, take a look at me. What's the problem here?
Don't you think? I mean, I'm sure. And I think people are still saying that. And by the way, we are now learning we're getting confirmation from Harry in his new book, but they didn't want this. They did not want Charles to marry Camilla, even in 2005. Harry apparently worried that she was going to be a wicked stepmother. Charles, then fast forwarding to the year that he actually convinced the Queen to let him marry Camilla, he only did that by promising that she would never be queen. He sold this to the British people, more or less, by saying she would always be princess consort. She would never have the title that would rightfully have gone to Diana. But I knew from the get-go that he was not going to do that. I knew that he intended to make her queen. It would be insulting to her in his mind to not let that happen. So there were little hints over the years. A schoolgirl comes up to Camilla, will you be queen? Well, we'll have to wait and see, won't we, was her answer. Charles had a similar response, very kind of coy about the whole thing, but it was a plan all along to convince the Queen Elizabeth, to endorse Camilla ultimately as queen, and she did it only months before her death. And it was a broadside to both Harry and William. They did not think their father would, go back on his promise, and so now we have Queen Camilla, and I think it's going to be a moment. It's going to shock the British people. They're not going to be, poll after poll shows that Camilla is still not popular. That the vast majority of the British people do not, I think it was 80% was the last figure I saw, do not want her to be queen consort.
Sure.
So it's one thing to have that announced, and it's another thing to see her crowned, in that ceremony. It'll be fascinating when they put that on her head, and she'll be shaking like a leaf because she's nervous about the whole thing. But
well, let's give Charles a little bit of credit here, in the sense of, what is it about Camilla that he just can't shake?
Soulmate, and of course they had this physical relationship early on, and I think it never stopped. And there are all those kind of embarrassing revelations over the years, likening himself to a tampon, all that stuff. But clearly they were meant for each other. She calls them two peas in a pod. But it's interesting to see that there was an abrasive or a cold relationship between her and William and Harry, and any notion that she ever charmed them, well, that just what flew out the window. That never happened.
But would you give Camilla high marks for her dedication to service? I mean, she clearly is trying to work her way into the hearts and minds of the British people through just work.
I think she feels that she's doing this for him because he needs it, needs this to work. And yes, we have to give her that kind of degree of credit. But don't forget, this was, just decades of planning and strategizing and scheming, for want of a better word. To get where she is. She always wanted to be King's mistress. That was her goal. She wanted to be like her great grandmother, Alice Keppel. I mean, that opening line when she met Charles, where she says, my great grandmother and your great great grandfather were lovers. How about it? She had already told her roommates, because for a brief time she had a job, although she is the granddaughter of a baron, so she's part of the aristocracy. But she told her roommates that when they asked why she wasn't going out with lords and viscounts and whatnot, she says, "I'm holding out for a king." They thought she was joking. No, she meant that. And I think she never, although she always wanted to be the other woman in the king's life, she never wanted to be queen. And
I wonder if she ever read a biography of Queen Alexandra, the wife of Edward VII.
Right.
And so she was the wife of Edward VII, and she was not the other woman. Alice Keppel was.
Right.
And Alexandra was so cognizant of their relationship. I mean, everybody was, that on Edward VII's deathbed, Edward VII didn't call for Alice to come see him one last time. Queen Alexandra reached out and said, you need to see the king one last time. That's incredible.
Right. She and Keppel met a bad end. Ultimately, she died of cirrhosis. But she had a very rough life following the death of the king. But Queen Alexandra, by the way, and who was known as Princess Alexandra, for the most part, was incredibly popular. She's very hard of hearing, very beautiful.
And,
yeah, and everyone loved her more than, I think, Edward VII. He turned out not to be a not bad king too. He gets high marks for that.
Well, when your nickname as Prince is Edward the Caresser,
you're right.
Instead of Edward the Confessor.
Right. No, he was indeed that. Keppel is just one of many, but the most important one, I think, in his life, certainly. But again, are you looking at? You had mentioned that the childhood of Charles mirrored that of other monarchs. And I think his was worse. I mean,
well, you had the Hanoverians where, George I hated his son, who became George II, and he returned that hate. And George II hated Frederick, the Prince of Wales, who was the father of George III, who died before coming to the throne. I mean, these Hanoverians they hated each other so much. I mean, like real hate. I can't be around you. You're despicable. You make me sick. That sort of stuff.
But not as small children.
I mean, true. Yeah. But as they grew up, they just the relationships were so fraught, and it just doesn't seem that Charles's gets any better with Philip's.
Right. Well, I look at these little incidents that any parent could identify with, where or look with in dismay. I mean, Charles goes through as a child a tonsillectomy, which at that time is a little risky. Severe case of measles, also in the 50s, a little risky. Falls down and breaks his ankle falling down the stairs. At 13, he has an emergency appendectomy. It goes on and on. At no time was he ever visited by his parents. And in the case of the emergency appendectomy, the Queen was hosting Eleanor Roosevelt, Buckingham Palace, and Eleanor asked where Charles was, and she said, "Oh, well, he's having an emergency. He's having his appendix operated on about down the block, basically." And the Queen never, Eleanor Roosevelt was just shocked and horrified that a mother would have that attitude.
Because Eleanor Roosevelt sweated out her children serving in World War II.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, she was a normal person, you know, but I don't think, again, the queen is somebody was very much about service and duty and the job that she had, and her dogs,
And her dogs and her horses.
and her horses. Oh, by
She
the
came
way,
to
those
Kentucky
horses,
one time just to come,
oh
uh,
yeah,
uh,
crazy.
let me
Sorry.
ask a question. You were talking about,
No, I'm going to jump in on the horse front. I think people should
go
know
ahead.
that the cost-cutting moves that Charles has made recently was to sell the Queen's 15 of the Queen's thoroughbred horses, and then put Camilla in charge of the Queen's royal stable. So that's a kind of a symbolic gesture, I think.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Um, we talked about Charles as a child in
Mhm.
relation to his father. We all learn things from our parents, good or ill.
Mhm.
How describe Charles as, basically a single parent for all these years? And how did he act towards his children?
Right. Well, early on, playful pillow fights, all that sort of thing, but most of the time not there. I mean, the same thing with Diana, even though we have this, Diana could be very affectionate. We know that in contrast to the Queen, whenever Diana came back from a trip or anything, we saw her sweep the kids up in her arms and that sort of thing. But I think Harry would acknowledge, and William, that the parents were not around as much as they would have liked. Now, his Charles's response to Diana's death, I think, is fascinating. Here, at this point, in 1997, when Diana is in the car crash, William is 15. His brother is about to turn 13, and Charles is more devastated and stunned by Diana's death than anyone else. I mean, he gets the news in Balmoral, and he's I think it was one of his aides said that it was when he was told that she had died, it was this howl of grief and having to, he was crying, he was weeping. When he flew to Paris to retrieve Diana's body, and by the way, the Queen didn't want that to happen, but Charles insisted that the British people would not tolerate it if he didn't show her respect. So
Charles about saved the monarchy at that point.
he did, absolutely. I mean, the irony here is that he brings it to the brink of destruction by forcing this divorce. With, he just is not going to. I mean, Diana is the one who triggered it finally with the famous Panorama interview. But I mean, it was Charles' insistence on his relationship with maintaining that with Camilla that really brought them to the brink of destruction. But then he saves it, and he saves it by giving Diana her due. But the moment he walks into that hospital, and sees Diana lying there in her coffin, because I interviewed the nurses who handled her body and other people on the scene, and they had actually, placed her in the coffin, a glass topped coffin. We had a window in it, but she was lying there, and the air conditioner was blowing her hair. It was a very odd scene, and Charles walks in, and the nurses say it looks as if he looked as if he'd been struck by an unseen force, was the way they put it, and reeled backwards, and everyone thought he was going to pass out. I mean, he was completely devastated and shocked, and yet, he managed to hold it together, and with Tony Blair, convinced the Queen to return from Balmoral, fly the flag at half-mast after the British people had been screaming for them to do something, and then give her the kind of funeral that she deserved. She wasn't, the Queen had said before, she's not entitled to a royal funeral because she's no longer a member of the royal family. They gave her one anyway.
Like it's not the 16th century.
And yeah, and there was that tidal wave of flowers that just engulfed all of London. It was remarkable. And, I think Charles tried to get his sons through that period, but I think he also regrets the fact that he along with Philip, convinced the boys to walk behind their mother's coffin, which was a very emotionally scarring experience. They still talk about it. Earl Spencer, Diana's brother, who walked with them behind Diana's coffin, said it was like walking through a tunnel of grief because there were a million people lining the streets. And there was that drum beat, reminded me of the Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's funeral, haunting drum beat in it. And So that was something I think that Charles now wishes he hadn't done, forced them to do that, because it's left. I mean, they're still going through some stuff about it. Harry has said that just flying into London is a triggering experience for him because it brings him back. And I was thinking during both Philip's and especially the Queen's funeral, he must have been relived. They both, you could see the look on their faces. They were reliving that horrible time. It's hard to tell people now who weren't really. I mean, when Diana died, I mean, it was the whole world was stunned.
Still
Everyone
so
remembered.
young, still so beautiful. And then did JFK Jr. die after her?
2 years later.
Yeah. Still so young, still so handsome.
Well, I mean, I wrote a book about that, and I remember I was covering the funeral because I'd written a best-selling biography of a couple of them about the Kennedys. So I was on the Today Show covering the funeral with Katie Couric commenting on it, and she turned to me at one point and said, "Do you think we're overreacting?" Because the whole country was in a state of shock and grief. And I said, "No, not at all. I mean, this was a guy who really was it wasn't so much the loss of him, but it was symbolic of the Kennedy, tragedy." Yeah.
You have a significant career as a journalist, and we're talking with Christopher Andersen, author of The King, The Life of Charles III. So let me ask you a couple of questions, and I'll just pose it this way. Talk to me about the relationship, please. Talk to us with the relationship between Charles and the press and Charles and historians.
Well, I think of the press he's always had, trouble with. I think the degree of he feels a horrible intrusiveness on the part of the press, and of course that's only logical. There is I don't think he's handled it as well as his own sons did for quite a long time. Harry is now kind of fallen off the wagon, but there was a wonderful time when there was a very telling moment when they're on a ski vacation just before the boys had taken him skiing, just before his wedding to Camilla, and Charles just suddenly starts bad mouthing everybody, all the press who are right in front of him. Everyone could hear it. It's being recorded, and they're smiling. Just keep smiling, Dad. And I think that really spoke volumes. I mean, he's always had a deep, deep resentment of the press and the working press, and especially the tabloid press, and, as you know, which is relentless in England. As far as historians are concerned, I mean, it's anybody's guess how he's going to handle this job. He's obsessed with heading the Commonwealth, and yet I think unless he gets is able to build that kind of relationship that his mother had with his subjects, he's in danger of having one country after another slip away from the Commonwealth. Right now, the Commonwealth, 1/3 of the population of the world is part of the Commonwealth, 53 countries, and a number of them are thinking of bailing on the, bailing the monarchy, and because he's technically the king of 15 countries right now. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I mean, he feels like that's what makes him paradoxical, is he's both modern. He has ideas that no one who's occupied that position have ever even entertained before, but he's also a staunch traditionalist. I mean, here's this guy who just fought tooth and nail to maintain fox hunting, and rural
That's right,
things like that. A great polo player, all those things that we associate with another time.
In your mind, does Charles III possess a particular philosophy of kingship?
Well, I think he would, if anybody expects him to be a placeholder for him to keep the throne warm for William, they've got another thing coming. I think he was going to be an activist king. I think that's where he wants to be. I think he'll be kicking people off the royal payroll. He'll be trying to find ways to economize, but also to, as you said, streamline the monarchy, slim down the monarchy is one of the things he's saying, so that it's more palatable to future generations. But he has to
preserve the grandeur.
Exactly. And and we'll see that with the coronation. I mean, right away, people were saying, "Oh, well, he's going to be the king." He's talked about making all these changes. So obviously he's going to be a smaller event. Well, absolutely not, because he realizes that circuses like this are what really keep the whole thing going.
I don't think he'll be able to match George the Fourth, but he'll do something. George the Fourth, I think, had the most expensive coronation in history.
Another guy who hated his father, and vice versa.
Well, that leads me right to my next question. So George the Third reigns for 60 years, 1760 to 1820. Then, spends several years basically demented.
Right.
So, his son, George the Fourth, has to wait all that time. Edward the Seventh, who we were talking about just a few minutes ago, his mother reigned for 64 years, 1837 to 1901. He has to wait all that time. So Charles has waited 70 years. I mean, is it people like Charles? I mean, it's happened before in British history. How do you think that he is going to make his mark and be activist?
Well, I mean, again, Edward the Seventh, everyone thought was something of he was just a playboy king, prince. People thought, but he turned out, as I recall, to be a rather effective monarch, or was thought of as that when he passed away.
Certainly in foreign policy, when he basically was the driver behind the alignment that ended up, the coalitions that fought each other in World War I. He put us on the side of, or put Germany or Britain on the side of France and Russia, because he and the Kaiser hated each other.
Well, of course, World War I is still a mystery to me. I have no idea what it was about. I mean, it was all personality. They were all cousins, or whatever. But yes, principles were not involved. But look, he has a lot of opportunities. But the funny thing is, something as seemingly superficial as this row between his sons could prove fatal. It could, because all we're paying attention to is that. And Harry, I have to say, it sounds like he has pulled no punches in this memoir. It sounds as if he's letting it all out there. And I have to say, I have to hand it to him. It's better than some whitewash job, where he's not laying it all out. I also think that this kind of tension between him, I've written about this, a book before this that I wrote called Brothers and Wives, about the relationship between the Sussexes and the Cambridges. I talked about the tensions between them. And now suddenly, again, now he's confirming that indeed he really resented the fact that William never got criticized for anything much, and was doing pretty much the same stuff that Harry was doing.
But Harry's saying the only way the family can come together is if I tear it apart first, and that just seems to be a bit odd.
It is odd, and I think he has he wants his father and his brother back, he says, but he has an awfully odd way of showing it. Certainly not the approach I would take.
Or you'd ask Kate to take, or the other daughter to take.
Yeah, it's funny because I was right. Oh yeah, and it was funny that Kate Middleton, another Kate, is so central to this, and William's feeling that Meghan kept insulting his wife, and here you have the kind of there are cultural differences, I think, that might have made this kind of these kinds of misunderstandings inevitable. Meghan is the kind of person from Southern California, very American, very frank. She's kind of the goop generation, and that does not, there's just ample opportunity for misunderstanding between somebody like that and people in Great Britain in general, much less people in the royal family.
So Diana and Sarah Ferguson seem to have gotten along okay.
Oh yeah, but then Diana dropped her over something incredibly petty.
Let me ask you just a couple of questions, and we're going to get to the 5 questions that all of our guests answer. What are Charles's thoughts or opinions about the United States or Americans?
Well, of course, that's Diana land. Diana felt that the American people were behind her 100%. And she was right, I think. I mean, always felt a little bit of hostility. His first trip here, when Richard Nixon was trying to palm him off on Tricia.
On Tricia, yeah, that's right.
Right.
Poor Ed Cox.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and the same. Nixon did the same thing with George W. Bush, tried to get put him and Tricia together as well.
At least Tricia looked like her mother.
Yeah.
as opposed to Julie, God love her, who looks just like her father.
Oh, that's true. That's true. No, Trisha was, yeah. But so there's always been a little. I think Charles has always felt a little uneasy here, but he's really gotten one of the principal things that the royals do. And Harry and Meghan are criticized for monetizing everything, for making these gigantic deals, $100 million deal with Netflix, $20 million book deal just for one book. For Harry, God knows what they're going to get for Meghan's book. But the fact of the matter is that Charles has been a big money raiser for a long time. I mean, he's taken sacks full of cash from Saudi princes. He's flown here to hobnob with the Annenbergs, going all the way back to the Annenbergs, people like that. The super rich Americans have funded many of his charities and to some degree his lifestyle. I mean, the loaning of yachts and planes and all this stuff. So that goes with the territory. It seems like it's not as craven as one might think within the context of the way that they behave. Money is a big deal. Sarah Ferguson got in trouble for trying to,
was it Nutrisystem or something she was hawking?
Oh, she did that, but yeah, she did that. But I mean, remember when she was caught trying to sell the influence connection to her husband, then husband Prince Andrew, for $750,000. By the same fake, undercover reporter that had done it before to somebody else.
Well, the British aristocracy has fallen in love with American money since the last half of the 19th century, when the robber barons and the industrialists all came. Ask the Churchill family.
Right. All the yeah, exactly.
Two final quick questions. One, was Charles ever going to abdicate before his reign in favor of his son? And B, were you surprised, given that the first Charles got his head cut off and the second Charles was probably the randiest monarch the British have ever had? Were you surprised he didn't change and become George VII as opposed to Charles III? So anyway, those are my two quick questions.
Well, the weird things, well, first of course, he waited too long for this. Oh my gosh, he got in trouble in 1993, I think it was. No, 1998. And now this is where the Crown got it wrong. They said that he tried to suggest, that the Queen abdicate much earlier. But in 1998, after Diana died, he definitely let a person doing a documentary on him let it be known that he would be delighted, was the word, if his mother abdicated, stepped aside. And she was furious when he did it. And he had to apologize profusely. So he was not ever going to relinquish his time on the throne or shorten it or anything. And the Queen had all these examples of other people abdicating. I mean, my gosh, the Emperor of Japan has abdicated. But Pope has, based fundamentally, he retired, Benedict. During her reign, one sovereign after another of all these other countries stepped aside so when they got too old. And but she wasn't going to do it. And I think Charles was embittered by that, and so to some extent. And so now that the job has finally landed in his lap, he has no intention of shortening his time on the throne. No, I don't see that at all. He might have, had she abdicated, with some deal, that he step aside for William, because William and Kate are the future of the monarchy. There's no question that they're the ones that are going to have to, if it's not severely damaged in the next several years, in the early part of Charles's reign.
Charles III doesn't surprise you?
Oh, no. Well, he admired both Charles I and Charles II. I mean, he had pretty favorable words. I think it's, they both, how old was Charles II when he died? 50 something, 56, something like that.
Died in 1685, I think.
Right. But I mean, he was only in his 50s, I think. So, and of course, both of them, of course, basically were ruled as absolute, they dissolved Parliament and all that. I mean, the second one did. So I think if he could have his way, Charles would would dissolve Parliament.
He made a joke to that effect when he spoke before the House of Lords, right?
Right.
If I'd been like either of my two namesakes.
Right, exactly. So so it doesn't surprise me. And of course, it's British history, and there, for whatever reason, I think historians view. Well, he was a very popular. Charles II was
Restoration Charlie.
right, very, very much. I mean, I think he widely regarded as one of the most popular kings, and so perhaps that figures into it as well. Although he had many flaws,
And many mistresses.
many mistresses. Right.
Is it just one last quick question? Forgive me, I keep saying that, but I'm enjoying this conversation much, and I'm very grateful for your time. Is there a British royalty movie or TV show that you think gets it or got it right?
Well, see, I'm a fan of The Crown. I mean, I think when Dame Judy Dench should get off her high horse here, you know, I mean, it is fiction, comes close to the truth. There are many instances where they're you know, they take liberties and they acknowledge it, but I think it's pretty great. And I'm a big fan of the King's speech, and the Madness of King George III was the goodie. Too.
You know, there's a great
great.
trivia. This is shows you the British mentality towards Americans. I love this. So when in the United States, the movie was The Madness of King George.
Right.
But in Great Britain, it was called George III.
Just George III.
Yeah. And they changed the title for the United States because they were scared that the Americans would think it was just a sequel.
They have such high regard for us, right?
We've reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Christopher Andersen, are you ready?
Do I have to answer with yes or no, or one word, or
It's even simpler than that.
Oh, okay.
All former journalists are the ones who go, I don't know about these questions. And I'm like, hey, I've been ambushed more than once. I get it.
Okay.
What was your first job?
As a reporter for the Livermore Herald and News in California when I was 16. And that's how long I've been doing this. And that was a daily paper.
What was your first concert?
Oh, that's, oh, wow.
That you paid for, that you can remember going to? Because you grew up in the best time for concerts.
Yeah. But I'm just thinking, oh, I know. Actually, I covered it, though. I'd rather say the one that I covered.
Sure.
The Altamont rock concert, the Stones.
The Rolling Stones and the Hells Angels?
Oh, yeah. I was there.
You're kidding me.
No. I was right there when the whole thing happened, man. I was, I may have been the only person there in a blazer.
Well, if it was leather, you'd been okay.
No. I was writing for Time at that point. I started doing as a full-time stringer for Time magazine in 1969. I'd been one for the New York Times before that. On the phone, I never said how old I was, so they had no idea. As long as you did the work, did the stories. So I went to the Altamont, covered it for Time magazine, and it was fascinating. And I'll never forget walking that poor fellow who was stabbed to death on the stage, seeing that. And just standing there and watching Mick Jagger on the stage and his Harlequin thing, singing "Sympathy for the Devil." And I think at the time the stabbing occurred, or the murder occurred on stage, it was he was singing "Under My Thumb." It was all just very bizarre and grotesque. And I remember saying to myself, I will never forget this scene, and because it was just unbelievable what was happening.
Well, I hope you don't find this too obsequious, but if I am so lucky to get your daughter, Kate Andersen Brower, back on to talk about her biography of Elizabeth Taylor, I'm going to suggest highly and frequently that she write a biography of you.
Oh, yeah. Nah, don't think that'll happen. You know, I could tell you what her first concert was, because I took her when she was like 13.
She answered the question when she was on. I just don't remember her answer.
Well, I think it was New Kids on the Block.
You win that particular. You win that fight.
I don't think she would have told you that one.
Number 3, if you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
Oh, but I was a Gatsby nut before anybody else really paid any attention to it. So I'm a very big Fitzgerald fan.
Number four, if you could number four, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
Oh my God. The event in history. Wow. That's great. And scary, isn't it? I mean, there're just so many. I suppose. Well, it will sound bizarre, but I would say the assassination of Lincoln.
You'd want to be in the box or in the crowd, or
Oh, no. I want to be close enough to see what was going on, but that's one. Well, I mean, am I supposed to say the birth of Jesus Christ? I don't know.
that's
On second thought, the birth of Jesus Christ.
Last question, and this is going to be kind of an interesting one for you because so many of the people who've been given as answers previous in our podcast are probably people you have actually dined with at some point.
Maybe.
If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record just to chat, whom would you choose?
Oh, I hate the off the record part. What's the point?
Well, that's a great caveat. But maybe they would just be a little bit, you've worked with these folks, they're a little bit more forthcoming if they don't have a pen and paper in front of them.
Well, on this wall, you've got everybody from Hepburn and Lauren Bacall to Ronald Reagan and the Henry Fonda and Gloria Swanson. I interviewed for guys, but the one thing they have in common is they're all dead.
So living today, would you want to have anyone in the world? What about King Charles III?
Well, I guess I should say that, shouldn't I?
You can say whoever you want.
This is going to take a long time. We'll say that for now. I should come back to you with a more thoughtful answer.
You have been listening. True.
We want people to think that is the most, and he's an interesting person, and I wouldn't mind that, but there might be somebody else as well. But yes, but Charles would be, if it could be on the record, that would be great.
And he would be fun, the fun Charles.
The fun,
not the dour.
No, we wouldn't want that.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our guest has been Christopher Andersen. He is the author of The King, The Life of Charles III. We'll put a link so that folks can buy your book. It's terrific. I love your writing. Thank you so much for your time. It was a real blast to get a chance to talk to you. I'm grateful.
It was fun. You got to give me another shot.
Who do you want to come on and talk about?
Let's see. Well, that last question was those last 5 questions were great. You didn't ask me the one thing I thought you were going to ask.
What was that, sir?
That Barbara Walters asked Kate Hepburn, which is, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be?
Let me ask you a question that I ask people who come on twice. What's the funniest movie of all time?
Oh man. Oh no.
I'm gonna tell you, I've asked a half dozen people and they've all given the exact same answer.
Really? Oh my gosh. Really? I'm trying to think of who they would well, you got to tell me what they said. And
National Lampoon's Animal House.
Oh. No, not by a long shot. I think National Lampoon's Vacation. I think National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation was better than Animal. But I'll come back to you with something. It'll probably be some, terribly, clever. No. I'm a big old movie fan, as you can imagine.
It Happened One Night. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
It Happened One Night. That's perfect. Perfect.
Please come on again, and I'll come up with some new questions. I promise.
Okay.
Thank
was
you.
fun. I will talk to Katie.
Thank you, please. That's very
Okay.
kind. Thank you.
Okay. See you.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.
This podcast was produced and edited by Chris Spangle and Leaders and Legends LLC. If you're interested in starting a podcast or taking yours to the next level, please contact us at leadersandlegends.net.